Giving validation is a gift to any relationship, and the rewards are multitudinous and profound. Now, when you bring a validation practice into the relationships of your life, you're setting yourself up for a more connected human experience. So what does it take to give validation? Well, this is part 3 of my 3-part validation series, where we're exploring exactly what you need to know about the important and often misunderstood topic of validation. So having looked at seeking validation from others and self-validation in parts 1 and 2, today we're going beyond ourselves and looking at the powerful art of giving validation. So today you'll discover why giving validation matters, the difference between sympathy and validation, the 3 relationship stages where validation is pivotal to success, the 6 levels of validation, and the fundamental skills you need to practice in order to effectively validate others. Giving validation is probably one of the most important skills you can give attention to. So stay with me and let's dive into the validation series part 3, Giving Validation. Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. If you're looking to improve your life, to heal, to grow, and mature as an individual, but maybe you found that some of the personal development and consciousness stuff has given you the impression that you need to be super serious and vigilant to get anywhere meaningful, or feeling like maybe you're just not up to snuff, well, this show is here to remind you of your humanity, and in fact that's where your true joy and brilliance lies. With over 25 years of experience in the transformation biz and having developed NPA, one of the world's simplest, pressure-free approaches to growth and well-being, if I do say so myself, I'll be sharing tips, steps, and insights that'll help you navigate all the aspects of life as a growth-seeking being. On this show, it comes to you with a good dose of humour, maybe a smattering of colourful language, a reminder not to take things so personally, and most importantly, to be kind to yourself along the way. Make sure you hit that follow button, and let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. I'm delighted that you're here. We are at episode number 122, which means you can go check the show notes at www.beabrillianthuman.com/122. That's the numbers, not the letters. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. We are already in March 2022. Blimey O'Reilly. We're starting the next intake of NPA Mastery on March 13th, and our sponsors for today is, well, it's me. I'm sponsoring myself. Yes, NPA Mastery, the Certified Practitioner Training Program for NPA, which will help you become an amazing top-level facilitator one-to-one with a resistance-free coaching, therapeuting, whatever the thing is that you do. And so I've done the sexy ad again for this episode, which I have the last 2 as well. The link, if you're curious about that, is www.thempaacademy.com/NPA Mastery. Now, because it's only really a week away, less than a week away till we start, if you're listening to this today and think, oh my goodness, that sounds interesting, get yourself to that link now. And, you know, there's a link on there that says you can book a call with me. Do it now. And we'll see if we can get you in before Sunday when it all kicks off. And if you're listening to this way in the future, there'll be another one coming up. So check out the link and it will give you the dates when the next one starts and you can get in early. How does that sound? Fantastic. All right. So let's get back into validation. So we've covered the basics of seeking validation from others and also self-validation. So a quick recap. I mean, and if you've come to this is the first one you're listening to, is giving validation. It will stand alone, but I would recommend you go back and listen to episode 121 and 122. Apart from anything else, in 121 we did some of the real groundworks. What is validation and why it matters in general. Also, there's some key distinctions in there, the difference between validation and approval, which is one of the things that's often misunderstood. And, when it comes to seeking validation, on that episode, I talked about some of the myths around seeking validation, talked about some key discernments that you need to make, difference between healthy and unhealthy seeking, in my opinion. And then last week we did 122, which was self-validation, which is, a very important part of having that sort of a strong, balanced personality. And I also talked about the difference between fake versus authentic self-validation, because I've seen a lot of, kind of fake, not really very healthy self-validation. We also talked a bit about the blocks to self-validation, and I gave you 4 validation practices. So there's lots of sort of backup work before you get to this. So if you've not listened to those already, why not pause this, immediately go to 121 and just listen to the stuff that will set you up perfectly for today's. And if you have listened to them, thanks very much. Hope you're enjoying this series. This is kind of a second time I've done a sort of 3-part series going a bit deeper into a topic. So hopefully you're enjoying that approach, and we'll see how it goes going forward. So today we're talking about giving validation, which kind of comes from a different place, really. This is very much about getting beyond the self, which is at the core of the non-personal philosophy, really, of non-personal awareness. By the way, if you're new here, hello new person. I'm delighted that you're here. I've dove straight in today without telling you anything about me or about non-personal awareness. What's he talking about, non-personal awareness? He says NPA, that's November Papa Alpha. What is that? Well, for the most part, people know NPA is a simple 6-line process that helps you stop taking things personally. But as I kind of mentioned with NPA Mastery, beyond that, getting into the deeper NPA philosophies, it really is about understanding the bigger energetic reality of life. There's a philosophy under it, and as a practice, whether it's for yourself, but certainly if you're any kind of coach or facilitator, baked into the non-personal philosophy is what I like to call the agendaless way, which can make your way of working with other people one-on-one incredibly magic, easeful, resistance-free, as I said, and it's wonderful. You can check it out. There'll be links actually if you go to the podcast website, which is beabrillianthuman.com. But you can also go to the NPAacademy.com, check out the courses, or have a look around Joel Young NPA. There's some other stuff. But Joel Young NPA basically is more self-development. The NPA Academy is more for people who want to use it in a practical way. But they kind of dovetail together. Anyway, so that's NPA. And oh yes, and I said I'd mention me as well if you're new here. So who the hell am I anyway? In fact, you might have been listening for a while and I haven't done this for a while. You're going, that guy sounds, he swears a lot. He laughs a lot. Who is he? Who is that man? Well, I suppose I've been doing this kind of thing. I've been working in this field for what, 26, 27 years now. I guess I cut my teeth and made my name with someone called Brandon Bays, who did a very famous book called The Journey, and I taught her work all over the world. And NPA came along in 2007, kind of popped out of me in answer to a prayer. This little thing, and I was like, well, that can't be it. But the voices in my head from on high said, this is your mission now. And so I started teaching it in 2009 and haven't really looked back. It spread all over the world. And this podcast came along a couple of years ago in October after me doing a workshop to kick my ass to get actually to do the podcast, which I wanted to do for a while. And it comes out pretty much every week, occasional holidays or breaks. But for the most part, every week on a Tuesday, which reminds me, if you want to get it every week, hit that subscribe button or the follow button or whatever they're using right now, so you can be in touch. But it's nice to meet you if you're new, and I'm glad that you're here. The fact that we're at episode 122 means you've got 121 episodes to binge now. Hurrah! All right, let's talk about validation. Oh, before we go into the thing, I want to honor my sources. I'm a big fan of honoring the source of things. People often ask me about sharing NPA and stuff, and I say, well, you're welcome to share it, but it's important. It's actually in our terms and conditions that you let people know where it came from. Bring them back to the website so they can get sort of first-hand information about it. And it's copyrighted, so mention the copyrights. So the sources for today, it's one of those episodes. Occasionally I do a bit of research, and I found some really great stuff which I wanted to lean into. So, for example, the 6 levels of validation come from the Psychotherapy Academy, And there's a YouTube. In the show notes, I will put the links to the various videos that I'm referencing. But I thought it was a great, succinct way to do it. So I'm going to sort of share their 6 levels of validation. Also, in terms of the key skills, I mean, I have my own understanding, but I found this amazing video with a woman called Naomi Feil. I think I'm pronouncing that Feil. Feel, not sure. But she's the founder of the Validation Training Institute. I love that video. I'm leaning very heavily into it in terms of the skills that I'm suggesting you learn. So I'll link that. And both of those reference a work that I'm much more familiar with, which is the Imago work, the work of Harville Hendricks and Helen LaKelly Hunt. And Imago work, again, it's very strong on validation as part of its relationship work, and couples therapy is a lot of stuff that you find with Imago work. All good, great things if you want to go and do a bit of a deep dive into those folks. I do recommend it, and I'm definitely leaning or standing on the shoulders of those guys for today's episode. All right, without further ado, let's dive in and start with, why does giving validation matter? So giving validation doesn't just matter, but it's actually a gift. I said this in the intro. It's a gift to any relationship. I think my experience has been that when I learned and began to really understand effective offering of validation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference there, it is that it really helped my experience of connection within the relationships. In fact, one of the things that we covered in episode 121, part 1 of this, when we talked about seeking validation and the myths of how often I've seen and heard people say, seeking validation from others is somehow a sign of, spiritual or personal development weakness. What's the implication? The fact is, people do need validation. We're all human. This is the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. It's like about our humanity. No matter how much work you've done on yourself and all the rest of it, validation is an important part. It's one of those human needs, ultimately. And the thing is that what validation does, when someone validates you, you feel relaxed. It helps us to feel safe and connected, which is where I was going with. That's been my experience in relationship. That sense of safety and connection comes when there's validation. And the thing about becoming relaxed, and I'm big on this across the board, really, feeling relaxed, safe and connected means you're way more resourceful. You're way more open and way more available to whatever it is that needs to happen. I mean, this is to do with the difference between stress and feeling relaxed. Like we see right now, the world's been in a very stressed space for a long time in response to all of the sort of various global things that are happening. And when you can see it on a global level, a stress response often causes pretty bad decisions. It's not that it's like the end of the world kind of bad decision. Well, right now as I'm doing this, who will see. But, it's one of those things that as a human, when you're stressed, you don't tend to make the best decisions. Your mind isn't open. When you're relaxed, you can begin to work through things, to have space to process things and to begin to open into better decisions. And that's why it's a gift to someone else to validate them, because it helps them go usually from a stressed, contracted space. It supports them in helping them to sort of work through their emotions and work through what's going on with them, relax and feel connected to you, and inside feel safe, and therefore they start to by themselves come through into a better state, which is normally what's happening when we do it really badly or don't bother validating. We have some crappy strategy to basically try and help them get over themselves. But validation, which is an act of empathy, really, it is a way that really facilitates that in a wonderful way. Naomi Feil, who I mentioned, I'm using Feil, I don't know if that's right, but it's who I mentioned before. It's the video that I'm leaning into. The direct quote from her, which I love, is, "Feelings that are expressed and validated with empathy are relieved." And that sense of having those pent up emotions relieved is what releases the pressure, reduces the stress, and allows that open connection in the relationships. So that's why it matters. That's why it is a really frigging good idea to get good at validating others. I mean, it's always nice when you're validated, and that's a good thing. Asking for validation is a good thing. But it certainly helps if you're going to take the first step in a relationship of start validating your partner or the people around you, whether it's kids, parents, whoever, friends, bosses. It works in all the relationships. If you can step up and offer validation, in my experience, people value it. So you become a valued person, someone that they recognize will help. And if you're lucky, they'll validate you back. But there we go. But it's a gift that does give back rewards regardless, really. So speaking of Naomi, she made a good distinction, which I was aware of but hadn't quite really put a nail on it, which is the difference between sympathy and validation. Because I said there, we often have crappy strategies. Sympathy actually is one of them. Again, it's one of those societal norms where the world says, oh, sympathy is a good thing. Well, I guess it has its place in certain things, but if you can go for validation over sympathy, I'm going to encourage you, because validation is empathy, which is getting you out of the way to acknowledge what's actually here for another person. Whereas sympathy is actually about you. Sympathy often has an agenda. In the worst case scenario, and this is what Naomi talks about, it becomes redirection and diversion. Oh, that's terrible, let's move on. And often it's done in a way with sympathy, it's done in a way which is then quickly followed up by the worst kind of positive thinking, which is that whole redirection and diversity. I mean, if you think about it, sympathy, sort of what that does is it often supports the idea of someone being a victim, because sympathy says, yeah, you're right in a way which is like you're right to feel bad, whereas empathy is I'm understanding, I'm attempting to or will understand exactly what you're going through. So rather than saying, oh, it's terrible and that other person's terrible, how could they do that to you, which doesn't actually help, it just supports some fairly negative things. Validation or empathy would be, I understand that it feels that way. So the differences are subtle, but they're actually, one of my big things really is to point out how the subtleties make the biggest difference. It's like almost like a logarithmic scale of the difference in when you get into the subtleties, which is why, one of the reasons I so love mastery is that's what we do. Yes, you learn the tools, but it's like people who come and do mastery have often got tools. They're already coaches and therapists for the most part. And they've got the mechanics down. Which most people do, and you can do great work with mechanics. But can you do really magical, profound work? Well, you would need to understand the subtleties and nuances of things, which is what we cover in mastery. And this is an example of that, the difference between sympathy and validation, when you come into those subtleties of what empathy really is, and that ability to get out of your own way, to really drop the agenda. These are all key things to the mastery of NPA and mastery of one-to-one practice, in my opinion. So it's important. But we'll get more into that towards the end. So in my experience, there's different parts. I mean, validation is always going to be welcome and powerful. But there are sometimes particular areas within a relationship where it can become really, as I said in the intro, pivotal to success. These are these points in a relationship where it can really make a difference of whether you kind of either splurge out into the wastelands of, relationship zombiehood, go your separate ways, or come together in a stronger way. That's the first one, strengthening. So often in the beginning of a relationship, or any point where it's kind of coming into that new cycle, if you come into that stage with powerful validation, you're going to build super strong foundations, because again, validation builds trust and connection. Now this can come at a point if there's been some kind of crisis or those kind of things. Often these are points in relationships where you sort of have an opportunity to start new. But if you go into a new relationship and you begin on the basis of validation, that's going to be a profound sort of set of foundations for that relationship. Another situation that I think it's probably the most important, this it really is a make or break, is when it's time for repair in a relationship. So what do I mean by repair in a relationship? Well, it's like usually it's after some kind of boundary has been crossed or someone's done some crappy behavior. So let's say you've done some pretty crappy behavior. If we take it like to the extreme, like post-affair is a time. It's like in my own experience, having been on the end of someone who had an affair, and then the validation was not present. It's like I even said to them at the time, I need you to take responsibility for most of the repair here, not least in which is validating the feelings that I have going on. She wasn't available to that, and we went our separate ways, which is often the way it goes. But that's a point. If something's happened that's one to the other, then let's put you in those shoes, or me in this shoes. If it was me had done some crappy behavior, it would be up to me to take ownership of the behavior and to really lean into validation of the other, because that validation is a way to repair trust, especially if trust has been broken. And it also helps, going into the place of empathy and validation means you're getting out of defense, because most of the time, I don't know if you've had this situation where there's been crappy behavior, either, by the other person in a relationship or by yourself. But when they've got that emotional stuff coming up, or if you've got that emotional stuff coming up, the usual response is defense. If you're in defense, then there's no chance in hell you're going to be validating someone. There's no chance in hell you're going to be really genuinely empathetic, and therefore you're really not going to get anywhere with that repair. So the act of validation, the act of empathy, the act of getting out of your own way, dropping the agenda, getting out of you, crossing the bridge to understand what's happening in them and empathize and validate it, it requires you to go out of defense. So in itself, it's like a win-win in that department. So any situation where there's repair in relationship, I think validation really is pivotal to success. And the other area is deepening. So it's a bit like where it is with strengthening, especially if there's been crisis, but anywhere in a relationship where you're going through the edges or the comfort zones. So this could be under trickier waters within a relationship, but it's also, I think there's times within any relationship. If I look at the Imago model, for example, they talk about the 3 stages in a relationship. You've got the romantic stage where everything's gaga. We don't see anything. Everything looks wonderful. This is why people hop from one relation to the next, because they're addicted to the romantic phase, which is, the chemicals are very different. The chemicals shift. You go into the power struggle. And then you go to the next stage, which right now escapes my brain. I shouldn't have gone off script, should I? Someone will tell me who knows Imago better than I do. The 4th stage, but 3rd stage even. But anyway, so the point being is there are stages, whether you call them that or something else, that you go through. I think there's a deepening over time, and each time you come to one, there's kind of got to be that leap of faith into a deeper trust or a deeper commitment. And at these stages, the stuff can start to come up. And that's where, if there's validation within the relationship, or at least you can offer it, that brings the safety, the sense of stability, the sense of support, and allows that deepening. So my belief about relationships and how they develop, especially long-term relationships over time, is that there's the classic sort of, there's a deepening and a plateau, then a deepening and a plateau. Or again, at any of those deepening points, that's where you can potentially scatter off if you're not ready to go there, or that some childhood stuff comes up, because each deepening within a relationship is a deepening in vulnerability. So validation is an incredibly powerful tool to smooth the waters of that transition and give you a much higher chance of successfully navigating that. And what's the point? Why does that happen? Well, as you deepen and deepen and deepen into a relationship, the potential is it gets so much better I mean, the old paradigm of long-term relationships is it kind of sort of fizzles into, like I said, the relationship zombie land. Well, if you're tolerating each other and just putting up with things, and you create crappy strategies that maintain a shitty status quo, and that's where you end up. But if you're in a relationship where it actually deepens and deepens and deepens, it gets more exciting. The intimacy gets deeper. Each of you can begin to flourish. So that's, again, why validation matters. Giving validation, it's like if you're going to take care of your part, your responsibility for the relationship, then really start looking at that validation. As I said, it's in the nuances. It's the subtleties, and like anything, with mastery of any kind, not just NPA mastery, but mastery of any kind, the differences become more subtle, but those subtleties are the things that make the difference. It takes someone who can take with a digital DSLR a nice picture to a picture where you go, wow, because it's still a picture of a duck. 2 pictures of a duck, one by someone who's got mastery, one by someone who's got a nice picture of a duck with a decent equipment. The one with mastery, there's levels of subtlety, and you can't quite put your finger on why that one just makes you go, oh. It's subtleties. That's the difference. And speaking of subtleties and mastery, how about we take a break and have a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by NPA Mastery. Yep, that's our very own NPA Certified Practitioner program, where you get to up-level your one-to-one work and set yourself apart from other coaches, therapists, and facilitators as you learn NPA's unique agendaless way, which means your client sessions become effortless and resistance-free. No more draining struggles and way more energy after each session. Plus, you'll be able to add the power of NPA and over 30 NPA situation-specific frames alongside whatever modalities you already use. Take your practice to the next level. Visit www.thempaacademy.com/NPA Mastery and get registered today. I'm deeply committed to helping you up-level the work you do with your clients. And here's what the graduate NPA Mastery participants say.
Buckle up, baby, for some turbocharged personal development.
This is by far my most favorite program ever. And believe me, I've had so many programs.
It's a holding your hand all the way through, teaching, using his experience, which is amazing. I've never had case studies done that well in my other courses. That I feel that it's a real learning experience. And he wants us to up level. That's one of his things. And yeah, up leveling right from the beginning. And from the first 5 minutes. But it's really great because I'm feeling that difference in working with other people, in how I am as I am working with those people, and to make it more easy.
And I could see the result. I could see the effect of that in my work with clients immediately, and it just gets better as we go further through the program.
I've learned how much of an agenda I did have when I thought I was pretty agendaless. So the agendalessness of becoming a practitioner opens up a vastness in my own practice that I just didn't realise was available to me.
It's the first time when somebody takes my hand and takes me by my hand and takes me through real intricacies and nuances of what it is to be a practitioner, to be a therapist.
Even though it's online, and I've been on other online things and you're drained at the end in front of a computer, this is the one where I don't feel drained. Because we laugh so much, it's so much fun, and the way it's taught, I don't feel drained at the end of 8 hours on a computer, even though that's a lot of time.
It's deep and powerful and profound. The promise that Joel's making about how agendalessness will improve your effectiveness as a facilitator and as a therapist, that is not an empty promise.
I'd love you to join us, so go to www.thenpaacademy.com/NPA Mastery and get registered today. All All right. Welcome back. So, having established that it's kind of a really good idea to give validation, I wanted to include the 6 levels of validation. Again, the source for this way of laying out these things, I love the way they've laid it out, is the Psychotherapy Academy, and I'll link to the YouTube video specifically that goes through these, because I'll sort of just go through them in brief. But let's go through them. Level 1. The idea here is that the higher we got the levels, the more intense the giving validation is. So we'll start with level 1, which I love, which is the first level of validation is actually showing interest. Like being awake. Now, you might think that's a bit obvious. Of course I'll be awake. But have you ever been in a situation where you're trying to have a conversation with someone, share your feelings, and they're on their phone? This is not even hitting level 1 validation, right? You have to be awake, alert, and showing some interest in what's being said if you even want to begin down the path of validation. So level 2 is accurate reflection. Now, this does come directly from Imago. So accurate reflection requires you to listen not to your brain's interpretation of what's going on, but to what's actually being said. So accurate reflection is reflecting back to someone what they've said, so that they can understand it. That the first is to sort of, you're actually listening to me, you're actually hearing what I'm saying. So you can say things like, what I hear you say is, and then say back to them what they've told you. That in itself starts to get us into pretty good realms of validation, because the validation there, by the way, comes from they feel validated because you've heard exactly what they said. That's powerful. And for a lot of people, I think most people don't even do that. And one of the ways you can invalidate someone is to reflect back to them an interpretation, or something which completely doesn't get what they're saying. But we think of that as a standard conversation, right? So getting good at accurate reflection is a powerful thing to do. Level 3 is where we start coming into empathy. This is where this requires you to put yourself in their position, which is empathy. To sort of read, reflect, and check is kind of the process to go through here. So again, this is interesting because a lot of people sort of do a fake version of this, putting yourself in their position. It's like what they actually do is sort of imagine themselves in a way which is very different. There's a subtlety here. Or they think of examples of their own situation. That can help. But if you really sort of be them and put yourself in that situation, then you're going to get a decent sense of empathy. Now, there's good language you can use to share it once you get which it makes sense. Is one of my favorites. It makes sense that you would feel that way. Like a way I might say it to someone is, if they're telling me what's happening and they tell me what story's happening in their head, then I can go into a place and go, well, if I told myself that story, I'd be feeling angry too. So I can empathize. And the thing about the read, reflect, check, the read is the empathy bit. The reflect is to share, say, did I get that? Is that what's happening? That's a check. It's like it's saying, it makes sense because of this. Am I getting it? I think checks are really important as part of the validation process. Giving validation. It's like to really check back with someone. What that does as part of the validation sort of techniques really is it stays with them and it helps them to feel safe to correct you, because they're invested in being understood. And what it says to them is, I'm invested in really understanding. That's why I use a lot, did I get that? Help me I really want to understand this. Did I get that? And they might say, well, almost, but there's a bit here. Okay, let me try again. Is it like this? Yes. Now you've got it. Okay. And there's an emotional aspect to empathy. There's times that I've sort of been in empathy mode, but I've been in a triggered state as well. It's quite challenging. And it's like, oh, why are they not feeling like I get them? I'm sure I get them. It's because some part of me is in defense, but because it requires me to let go of my own agenda. It requires me to let go of my own position and step into their position in order to empathize. And that's level 3. There's 3 to go. So if you want to add more in, go to level 4. So level 4 brings in the history that you know. It's like if someone comes to me with a situation, I can say, did I get that? And I can say, it makes sense, you're telling yourself that story. Bringing in at level 4, validating with history, I might say, well, I know you told me before, like when you were a kid, you had this kind of thing, where perhaps you were in a situation where you always felt blamed, and then there's this thing happening at work, and you're feeling blamed. Well, it makes sense given what's happening, but it also makes sense that you're feeling it so strongly because you've told me in the past that's an issue for you. So see, I'm bringing history in, which gets a deeper level. What it says to them is you know them. That's the message you're sending. I know you, which again validates them in a deeper way. And then level 5 is where you really go for it. I kind of brought it in there based on current circumstances. That's really where it makes sense. In the context of what I know is happening with you now and what you've told me, everything you're telling me about how you feel makes sense to me. So this really tells them that you understand from your own perspective, why they might feel that way. That it makes sense based on their history, and then given the current circumstances that they've described, which means of course you have to get it once you've got it, that it really makes sense that they're experiencing and feeling what they're feeling. Now, level 6 from the Psychotherapy Academy on YouTube, they talk about this because they're teaching this in the context of therapeutic work. So they talk about it coming, level 6 is doing this from a place of radical genuineness. In other words, coming as an equal or being real. They're saying this more from the view of a therapist. And I've seen this, again, we see it in Mastery, is where it's like if you're in a role, if you're doing this in a role, playing the role of I'm a therapist, therefore it's my job to empathize. It still can work really well because we're hungry for it. But if you can make it in a way where you're just being equals in a therapeutic situation, and it's really coming from a genuine place, and you're so free and congruent with the methodologies, if you like, that you can just be yourself. Ultimately, that's the ultimate way to do it. But I also think that that's true in terms of whenever you learn something. I've talked about this a lot in the podcast. You have to go through that sort of you go from the unconscious incompetence, in other words, you don't know something, to conscious incompetence, you don't know something, to that conscious competence stage, which is probably where you'll be as you start trying to validate. You'll be thinking about what you're doing. Now, that isn't necessarily coming from what they're referring to as radical genuineness. You need to get to the next level where you've practiced it and can become, what's the term now? Conscious incompetence to conscious competence. That's the next one, which, you're doing it well, to unconscious competence where it's automatic. When you get to that unconscious competence where it's automatic, then you can just really bring your whole self to it, be really authentic and genuine with it. And then you're in a space where it becomes super, super powerful. So what are the key skills for effectively validating others? Well, understanding those 6 levels of validation, I think, is really good. And again, I'm going to recommend you literally go and watch the YouTube video with Naomi Field. It's a TEDx talk. You can probably find it, but I will link it in the show notes. So go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/122. And I'll go through them now briefly with you. So the first one you need to lean into is empathy. So we've talked about empathy all the way through this. So in order to build empathy, you're going to have to be honest with yourself. Remember how I told you that, there's times I've been trying to validate my beloved, but I've had my own defenses up it took an act of honesty and actually surrender before I could actually be empathetic. I think we like to think that we're empathetic a lot of the time, but actually we're not, because we're still stuck in ourselves. You have to put your feelings aside. You have to become an empty vessel, non-personal. There's nobody here. There's just an empty vessel willing to receive and be available to what's happening with the other person. So it's quite a skill to be empathetic. There's a big difference between genuine empathy where you're not there versus someone that can get a sense of a read on something, maybe offer suggestions in an understanding way. Genuine empathy is a deep and profound skill that takes some practice, because it requires you literally to get out over yourself, get out of the way, and that takes some radical honesty. The next skill is rephrasing or mirroring. So we talked about this in terms of accurate reflection. So again, the checking piece of that is something that Naomi leans into. Is this what you mean? It's a matter of reflecting back accurately what's been said to you without embellishing it, overcomplicating it, all of those things, and then checking back, is that what you mean? If you're going to do an act of empathy or reading or trying to get a sense of what's going on, you need to check what's going on. The other thing when it comes to mirroring, or again accurate reflection, is it's not just the words. It's like you've got to mirror the tone, the pace, how they said it. If you want to join someone in that space so they feel like you get them, using tone and pace is part of it. So again, rephrasing and mirroring is quite a skill to learn. The other piece that Naomi talks about is polarity or upscaling. So this is a really interesting one, which I hadn't come across. I've understood that I've done it in certain ways, but the way she talks about this is she literally asks the question in the video. If you go and watch it, you'll see she talks about working in a care home with old people who were in a situation where they were sort of doing the sort of almost dementia style thing of just saying things that had happened and that hadn't happened. And she describes how, most people's responses are, that didn't happen, basically calling them a liar. But instead she asks them, what's the worst thing about that? Now that might seem crazy to begin with. Well, they're already feeling bad. You're asking them what's the worst thing about that. Then chances are you're going to make them feel even worse. Much better to be more positive. Do that toxic positivity and say, oh, cheer up, it'll be okay. Chin up, what? But it's doing the opposite. It's turning that around and saying, what's the worst thing? What that says is I'm willing to hear the deeper fears, the deeper feelings, the deeper upset, the deeper grief that is going on underneath. That's allowing the doors to open, and it validates that the feelings that are often being hidden, because in many situations someone will present something, but there's something deeper going on, because it's very vulnerable to go to those deeper places. That what's the worst thing about that gives permission. So having the ability or the willingness to upscale or to use the polarity of what's normally used is a powerful skill. And the last one she mentions, which I totally agree with, is don't lie. Don't argue with them. If you underneath it, they know, that if they're coming out with a situation and they're giving you kind of bullshit basically, because it's an emotional expression and emotions come out in messy ways and there's all sorts of complex things. If you say, well, I didn't say that, or you never said that, or that didn't happen, or you lie about your feelings about it, it's going to create a ripple in the energy. This is so profound. Again, these are the subtleties, these are the differences that mean you allow someone to come out of themselves, or you send them deep down. Normally if someone's, the part of their emotional expression is, objectively bullshit, the chances are they're just projecting out something and it's too hard to see or to experience or to feel what's actually going on. That's the gift you're bringing to it. If you listen and rephrase like as a question, as like a if someone says, you stole my toothbrush, I stole your toothbrush, it doesn't go, no, I didn't. I stole your toothbrush. It's an inquiry. You're going into, interesting. What's happening here? I'm open to investigation. I would like to understand that. I'd like to empathize whatever the underlying emotion is that's going on, so that we can find connection. Because right now you're meeting me with accusation and, about something which I know I didn't do. So I can either get defensive, call you a liar, tell you you're crazy, or I could empathize. Or I could just go, okay, so I stole your toothbrush. Tell me about that. Very, very different. So if you can master those two, empathy, rephrasing and mirroring, the willingness to upscale or go into polarity, what's the worst thing about that, and to stop lying or arguing with people, you're going to be a lot further on with those validation skills for others. All right. That brings us to the end of the validation series. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear from you, actually, if you found that this has touched you, has moved you, has helped you in some way, given you some insight. Do let me know. You can get in touch with the usual means. Find me on social media at Joel Young MPA on things like Twitter and what's the other one? Instagram. Instagram. Facebook, if you go to MPA Rocks. You can contact me by direct message there, those kind of things. Let me know, or email me, joel@nonpersonalawareness.com. I'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you're feeling really brave, I'll validate you if you do. Go to the website, beabrillianthuman.com, hit that thing that says leave a message, and you can leave me a voice message. Of course, you can also voice message me on the wonders of Messenger and the like. But that's a way to go directly. It'll come directly to me at the podcast here. So I'd love to hear from you. I hope you've enjoyed this series. Go out there, ask for validation when you need it. Validate yourself whenever you can, and do your best to start making a huge difference in your life by really leaning into the skills of giving validation. Believe me, it will make a huge difference to your relationships as much as you can to bring that into your life. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this show, I'd love you to do me a solid and tell someone about it. They can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. Plus, if you visit the website, www.BABrillianthuman.com, you can share the show notes to social media and make my day. Also, make sure you hit that follow button, and if you haven't yet downloaded the MPA process sheet, head on over to joelyoungmpa.com and get your free copy today. Big love, and see you next time.